And if they expect me to walk away from Luton with nothing, I'll make very sure there's nothing to walk away from.
Hello and welcome to the Oak Road Tatter podcast. I'm Billy Mully, joined today by Jamie Castle, Kieran Robertson and Stephen Day after Luton Town's first ever Premier League fixture. 4-1 defeat to Brighton over Albion, but as I'm sure we'll allude to, there's plenty of positives to take, lots of lessons and generally a lot to talk about transport, which is not how I envisioned this first pod of the season to go, but that's the state of affairs going into today. Jamie Castle, how are you getting on today?
Yeah, good. I was starting to get scared that we might miss pod recording because of the train cancellations, but no, we got there in the end. Yeah, a slight farce on Saturday evening, but no, other than that, Premier League football. It was nice to be at my first Premier League game watching the Hatters. Obviously, not the result we were after, but as you said, lots to take from it and to build on.
And Kieran, somehow you were the first person home. Actually, bar Stephen driving, but in terms of the train lot, you were the first person home, and I don't know how you managed that.
To be fair, it was quite funny because I was sat outside the station. I think it might have been Cam actually. He was like, "Where are you going back to? Like Bedford, Flitwick?" And I was like, "Swindon." And he was like, "What?" Like it was like one of those things where I was like, "I feel like I've told you that before." But anyway, my journey was a strong 3 hours, and you can imagine my missus' face when I said I'll be home at 9:30. And didn't get on a train until 8:15, with a 3-hour journey ahead of me. So she was thrilled, as you can imagine. And to be fair, it was actually a good crack because the first half of it, I was sat down with Ben, also known as Luton Analytics on Twitter. So had a nice catch up, had a nice chat about all things Oak Road, all things the game and all that stuff. I think I was the first one home purely because I decided to persevere and just stand outside the station after a while. Just got bloody bored, had food, had a beer, and just thought, why not?
And Stephen, you probably were the most sensible one. You drove. Fair play to you. How have you been doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Happy to be back on. And yeah, obviously, I've been to Brighton a few times, and trains have always been bad. So I was like, I'm just going to drive it because if anything goes wrong on a day where the trains are already messed up, they're going to get messed up more. And I'm glad that I did. And I was happy and home by about 8:30. I was living the dream.
Can I raise a question for the group as well? Do any of us know what a Falmer is now?
A lovely football stadium in the middle of absolutely bloody nowhere is what a Falmer is.
Like, I saw a Brighton fan sort of say, oh yeah, but without the train strikes and without all the train problems, that the infrastructure and the logistics would have been fine. I was like, no, nothing about any of that screamed a logistical dream. If anything, it just looked like a nightmare and was just made worse because of everything that was going on with the trains. Like,
is that why it's free on a match day? Because it's horrendous.
More than likely, just to sweeten the blow, I guess.
They thought they'd save themselves from all the Labour pay claims that happen every match day, so they thought now could make it free anyway. So there's nothing to actually claim back.
TL Rail got bored of all that. They were like, we don't need 100 emails every match day, Ian. Just let it be free.
Off the transport and let's talk football because Luton Town, of course, played their first ever Premier League game. A 4-1 defeat to Brighton, 1-0 at half-time, 2-0 2-1, and for a little bit of time we were very optimistic that we could have actually got something out of the game, but as we've seen, individual errors and slight naivety at times. Of course, there's a lot of positives, as we've already alluded to, but there was certainly difficult times, and that's something we're going to have to get used to facing this season. But all in all, we'll go into a bit more detail, but there are lessons to be learned, but good memories that were made, good signs of intent from Luton, both in and out of possession. We'll start by going into our new feature on Twitter, which is too good and too bad. 2 good points from the game, 2 aspects that we can class as good, and 2 that were not so good. We've got loads of different ones here. We'll go first for LTFC Talk, who said Kabore and Giles looked threatening going forward. And the second good aspect from him was stayed in the game until their third, which I think we can all agree with. In terms of his 2 negatives, we looked very shaky defensively. Bell and Lockyer caught out at times. And then the last negative was Chong struggled going backwards, caught in transition too often. I'll come to you first, Jamie, because I think this LTFC Talk comment is something that his answer's been mirrored and basically been relayed by other accounts. Kabore and Giles did look threatening on their counter-attack, and I thought there was a stat posted out there. I don't quite remember what it was exactly, but in terms of touches in the final third and touches in the penalty box, we actually scored quite highly on that compared to some of the relegation teams last season. So I guess in that respect, that sort of counter-attacking element can be seen as a positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kabore in particular was excellent. Obviously, at the games I didn't hear, but I think some of the Brighton commentators from the people that are watching at home said that he was one of the first wing backs that have been able to contain Matoma from a pace perspective, which was a massive positive. Matoma's up there in terms of the wide attackers in this league, and has been linked to a big move elsewhere. So I think that was a positive. There's some clips of some Spider-Man type tackles. It almost seems like what Wan-Bissaka made his name for at Crystal Palace. Those sort of defensive recoveries that he made. I think Kabore showed glimpses of that. On the other side, Ryan Giles. I wasn't as big on Ryan Giles as others were after the game. I thought in terms of his deliveries were fantastic, but I think maybe it was a bit of a mental thing where I'm used to Alfie Doughty sort of driving to the byline. There wasn't as many runs from deep as we've come used to with Doughty. He was a bit more like a James Bree type fullback or wing back on the other side, where his main threat is his deliveries and his passing ability rather than his sort of running ability. But still, for a Premier League debut away at a very, very good side in Brighton, obviously we banned the phrase "it's going to be a tough game," but it absolutely was that. We knew it would be. We by and large contained them. I think at times we rode our luck, and obviously on the score, from a scoreline perspective, we were in it until the 80th minute. But yeah, it probably could have been 3 or 4 before. But we're going to have to ride our luck this season, and it's the best sides in this league. We are going to have to. But yeah, I mean, there certainly were positives, and I think the wing backs were up there in terms of the positives.
Going on to Lewis Jones, a writer here at Oak Road Hatter. His 2 good aspects of the game were Kaminsky and Morris. And coming to you, Kieran, Thomas Kaminsky might have conceded 4 goals in his first competitive start for Luton, but we can't really read into that too much. Brighton, as they proved, they were relentless in the way they attacked, and Kaminsky made some very good saves. I think his kicking was consistent. I think there was a few ones that went slightly wayward, but for the most part, his kicking was good. He's only going to grow into becoming a Luton player and only develop through that. In my head, he had a very good start, and on the other side of things, Morris gets on the score sheet. He was difficult to handle against Premier League defenders. I guess those 2 can be classed as positives as well.
Yeah, of course. And I think to sort of follow on your Kaminsky point, and it's the same story of any goalkeeper that comes into a new team. It's just about assigning yourself within that team and building that relationship with your defenders, right? There's 5 players ahead of him who he needs to be able to communicate with very well, whether that's when he comes to collect the ball, whether that's just short distribution, long distribution. They're just little things, like little tweaks that over time are just going to get better and better. Shot stopping, he was unreal. And it's weird to say that after a keeper's conceded 4 goals. But there was so many chances. Like, it's easy to say it now, but they could have had 8 or 9. And on another day, I don't think Horvath saves half of them, I'm being honest. And that's a good thing, because whilst Saturday was 4-1, against another team, that game ends 0-0 or it ends 1-0. And there's going to be a case of that this season where we're going to get peppered like we have, but we're going to come out the winning end. And at full time, we're going to go, thank God for Thomas Kaminsky. But as for Morris, happy that he's got our first ever Premier League goal. I feel like it was just after the season he had last year. He was the one that was lively. I think going forward, it's hard to base it off of one game. I would love to see him and Jacob Brown as a partnership a little bit more often, just off the glimpses we've seen. And I'm sure we're going to get on to Jacob Brown later in the vid. I'm sure we're going to get on to Obene as well. But for me, Eli was a bit lost, and it's easy for me to say after one game, so I don't want to make any harsh judgments. But based off of what we saw on Saturday, Morris going forwards, he's the one, and I think we've said that before. If either one of them were going to get dropped, it's not looking like Carlton.
And finishing off Lewis's point here, his 2 bad elements were naivety and not being as solid, and I assume that means not as solid as what we've seen Luton be in the Championship. And I guess that comes with time, Stephen. That comes with settling in the Premier League, establishing ourselves after a few games. It's not going to be a change overnight, adjusting to the world's best division. It's going to be a few weeks before we see the very best of Luton again. But there are positives, there are glimpses of what is to come.
Yeah, and I think, as Giles said in his post-match presser, that it's a learning curve. It was a complete learning curve, and the next few games, next 5 games really, are all going to be learning curves. Just how to deal with the opposition in this league, because it's so much quicker than the Championship, and it's going to be horrendous against better teams. And Brighton are a really good team. They're in Europe now, so we've got to learn quickly. But there was a lot of positives, and it was disappointing to see the defence as leaky as it was, like in the last 10 minutes. But as we said, we were in it until that point, really, until the 3rd goal, and it was just one of those ones where it's so easily avoidable if Pelly had just gotten rid of it, or just put it out for a corner or something, rather than trying to do the cheeky thing. But he's going to learn from it. As I said, it's a learning curve, and it's hopefully we're going to be better with that sort of thing going forward. Hopefully we're going to be better defensively, because we're going to have to be if we want to survive.
I don't remember ever being as positive after a 4-1 defeat. But I think that was just the occasion. It was being a Premier League club. It was more of a celebration of what we've achieved, I think. And whilst there were positive glimpses, I think every Luton fan in attendance was just happy to be there, happy to hear the Premier League music, happy to see the Premier League advertising. Everything about the occasion was top draw. Going on to editor Mark, his 2 positives: Kaminsky, solid and the most trust I've had in one of our keepers since Mark Tyler. Of course, we've had difficulties in the goalkeeping department for a fair few years. Kaminsky certainly on his way to proving himself, and hopefully after a few games, as we've just mentioned, he can show his best form of himself. And also Kabore and Chong are going to cause lesser teams a massive problem. So again, very, very similar, these answers, and I think that speaks volumes about how the Luton fan base saw this one. Going on to his 2 negatives: naivety cost us, especially in the final 20 minutes when legs were tired, and positioning and reaction times during turnover left us chasing, which again, Something that somebody else alluded to in there. It was, without going over, we would probably say the same things going into our own Brighton review. Sorry, we'll go on to the game at a sort of an individual basis. So there was, I think we started well. I think we pressed well. I think we harried them into making a couple of mistakes. Mitoma took a while to get settled in, and I think Kabore had the better of that battle in the first half. Solly March, I think, is an incredible player, and in my opinion, last season he was even more impactful than Mitoma. So I think Giles doing a good enough job on him was um, somewhat of a surprise, because what we've heard about Giles is that defensively speaking, there could be a couple of issues, but offensively, that's where he really shines. So from a defensive standpoint, I was impressed with what Giles was able to do, and I think between him and Bell, they sort of nullified March, bar the goal. Matoma had a little bit more joy in my eyes because he navigated that space in between Kabore and Mads Anderson quite well. Just looking at that first half, Stephen, in a little bit more detail, were you impressed? We've sort of spoken there about how Brighton caused us threats, but we also, offensively speaking, we got into some dangerous positions. We broke with pace. Did it look like we were still a championship team playing a Premier League team in that first half, or do you think that we sort of held our own against very, very capable opposition?
Very much held our own, but at the same time, like you could say that you could tell who was the promoted side and who was the side that had just got into Europe. But at half time, I was sat there thinking, like, we've got a good chance of getting a result here, and we weren't out of it. We weren't getting overpowered. There was obviously the little, naive mistakes, naive bits here and there. But going forward, we were good, and I think on another day, maybe once Morris has had a couple of appearances in the Premier League, he might have put more of those chances away, and we might have gone into half time either 1-1, 2-1 up, even. And I think that's it's almost incredible that we can sit here and say this, because we have just come up. Obviously, there is that element of the momentum of us just having been promoted, and the excitement of the occasion and all that. So there was going to be a little bit more of a boost for the players, but I think we pretty much matched them in the first half, and I was really, really pleased with the performance. And it's if that's the sort of performance we can carry on throughout the season, and I don't think we're going to have too much to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that, like in the first half in particular, I bar the João Pedro absolute sitter that he missed in the first sort of 5-10 minutes. He didn't they didn't really carve us open. I mean, I think that their goal came from a fantastic cross from Matoma, and you probably should say that I think Bell lost, was it Gross or March for the header. So I mean, I think if you're heading into the season based on our team last season, if there's a question mark over defence or attack, it would be the attack. Because last year, for me, we got promoted based on how good we were defensively rather than going forwards. I think we scored good goals last season. We scored at the right times, and we won games by fine margins rather than blowing teams away like Bauer did it when they were at their best, and like Burnley did. So I guess to go into Brighton the first half and defensively maybe at times a little bit suspect, but we did cause Brighton some issues on the counter in particular. Kabore and Chong found a lot of space down that right in behind Estupinian, and I think was it Van Heck on the left of the two. So found a lot of joy behind them. So that was my big question mark going into Saturday, was could we create good quality chances against Brighton, and I think we did. And defensively, I mean, Matoma did cause some issues down that left hand side. But if you think about that triangle of players on that right hand side, you had new signing Mads Anderson at right centre back, new signing Issa Kabore at right wing back, and new signing Taif Chong at sort of right centre mid. So you had your natural little triangle on the right. You had three players that were new signings, albeit our will be better than what we have had previously. Tactically, they're still getting used to the way Edwards wants to defend in terms of shape, when to press, when not to press, when to set off, what players to follow, man mark. It's little details like that where obviously you work so hard on it, but it takes more than just a pre-season to get it down to sort of and nailed. So I'm confident that give it a few months, if we play that game again, then I think we come out of it with a result. So I think if you think about it in sort of more detail in terms of personnel and tactics, I think the game plan was spot on. I just think the players just need some time just to get used to each other.
Yeah, and it could take a while. I think there's been a lot of pundits recently speaking about how long it took them to adjust to the Premier League, and some of them were saying up to sort of 6-7 games, which, you know, the Premier League is a very long season, 38 games across a year. There is plenty of time to improve, and I guess this 2-week period will be used very effectively. Of course, we'll be preparing for Chelsea now, but we've got the fixture against Burnley postponed, so that gives Rob Edwards a real good period of time to implement his tactics on a more deeper level, get more signings in, get them up to speed, and I think that's only going to be a positive. I think it's good to have a game like Brighton very early on. If we would have played someone like Sheffield United, and it could have been a game that lacked quality, given both teams adjusting to the Premier League and making a fair few signings. Same with any team that you sort of expect to be down near the bottom, but ultimately it's a lot learned, and I know we've used that phrase a lot. There has been a lot learned, plenty of positives, and whilst we did lose 4-1, I left with sort of my head held high. I think we're going to be competitive, and I think we're more than capable of going to play these bigger sides, these teams that play quality football, and showing our resilience and break on the counter. I'm looking forward to when it all kind of clicks, when we're fully settled, every player knows their role to near enough perfection, and we can start really testing ourselves and probably be that little bit braver on the ball.
Yeah, I think for me in my head, I've got the end of September in my mind is when I'm really going to start thinking, I guess, big picture in terms of the season, because it's in September. After Chelsea, you've got West Ham and Wolves at home, and then Fulham and Everton away. So you've got those 4 games in succession after Chelsea away, and that's the 4 games where you'll really see where we are in the league in terms of, are we going to be in a right battle this season to avoid the drop, or are we actually going to be a bit more comfortable than we might think we are going to be. If we can come out on those 4 games with a good tally, be it 2 wins and a draw, 3 wins, etc., then I think that would be a good sign, because you've got those 4. You'd have had 2 tough games, Brighton and Chelsea away, to open up, where, let's be honest, if we were all betting men, we would have put a lot of money on 0 points from those first 2 games. So it's really the sort of the following 4 where we need to think about it in sort of more detail in terms of how we're coping and adapting to the league.
Like they did last season, you would expect Brighton to dish out some severe hammerings this season to lesser teams. The way they play football, they're relentless in the way they attack. They're not happy with just a 1 or 2 goal lead. They will beat teams by a bigger scoreline than they beat us. I think that's also quite important to consider. We'll go on to Mads Andersen, because he's obviously coming. He's learning the position. He's learning a sort of new tactical demand from the way we play, basically. What did you make of Andersen's performance, Kieran? In my head, he was defensively, he really impressed me in terms of his duels, in terms of his positioning for the most part. I do, in the back of my mind, think he's better suited to the central position of the back 3. I think mobility is really key for those sort of wider centre-back positions. By no means writing it off, but I think he did struggle at times from a mobility perspective.
He did, and the key thing for me was he lacked mobility. I used the phrase earlier talking to a work colleague and said bricks for feet. And I don't know if that was just a case of he's not played Premier League football before, so the pace of the game he's not quite up to speed with that yet. The other thing that I noticed more was he just let Pedro go a lot. It was Pedro to Matoma, Matoma to Pedro, and who else is up front? Welbeck. And those three sort of had this little triangle, and Pedro was always able to, left or right of him, just seep through no matter what. And it was almost like the quick ones and twos that he was struggling to keep up with. Like when he was up in the air, yeah, he was winning his duels, he was winning his tackles, don't get me wrong, but they found it really easy to get round him by just simply playing it round him. Would Gabe Osher have done that? Was the question I asked myself earlier. Give or take, probably not. I agree in your sense. I think he's better suited in the middle of a three rather than on the right of it. But it's tough to sort of make that decision when you know you've got Tom Lockyer, who plays in the centre of a three, and you know he is more than competent to do so. Do you make that sacrifice, or do you persevere with a Mads Anderson at that position, at least while someone like a Gabe Osher or Reece Burke isn't fit enough to do so?
I think that's a fair enough assessment. And Stephen, we made some changes going into sort of last few minutes, last sort of passage of the game. We brought on Ogbene, we brought Jacob Brown, both for their first competitive minutes for the club. Both quick, both direct, both pacey, both in my eyes made a rather good impact. Can you see any of them emerging as starters? We have to say Morris and Eli have served us very well. They're players that will cause problems, but there'll be games you'd think that require something different. And do you think Brown and Ogbene are those kind of players that will give us that something different?
Yeah, I think for a while now we've had sort of similar style of attackers. We've not been, I mean, other than Harry Cornick, we've not really had like someone pacey like Jacob Brown, someone that's like quick and nimble. Like we've had like a few on loan, a few youngsters, but no one's been like ready to be first team. And I think Jacob Brown has given us, or going to give us that sort of difference to what we've had. And I think he looked really, really good Saturday. And I think his pace, his confidence, I mean, both him and Ogbene, the confidence they had coming into a game, coming into, first Premier League game, our first Premier League game, being up against a strong opposition, they both had confidence. They didn't look out of place at all. Jacob Brown was, tracking back, trying to win the ball back when we were chasing. So, Benny, the confidence he had to do that little bit of skill, like in our box, sort of thing, like that's the sort of place where you don't want to do it, but he had the confidence to do it and pull it off, which was brilliant. So I think they're going to be really good. And I think there will be some games where there will be better suited starting, but then there might be certain games where there's not a lot in it. And if we bring those two on for, say, same sort of substitutions that we made on Saturday, they're going to change the game for us. And so I think their role will more be like, especially Jacob Brown, I guess, like more be like game changers rather than starters. But there will be opposition where it will be better suited for them to start and sort of go at teams from the off rather than growing into a game and being able to get points later on in the game.
And it's the flexibility factor as well. I think Rob Edwards going into this season, we didn't see too much variation on that kind of 3-5-2 last season in the Championship because it worked so well and there was no real reason to deviate from that. But I think this season, games are going to be a little bit more difficult. Games are going to demand different things. And I think that's what we've recruited for. We've recruited for those different kind of games that we're set to experience, which can only be exciting when you've got players like Brown and Ogbene waiting on the bench.
Sorry, just on that, like I think with this league as well, it's going to be more of a fight for survival rather than last season where if we had something that worked, there wasn't too much need to deviate from it. Like we knew that we were going to be going into games as one of the stronger teams and in the league, and whereas this season it's going to be fighting for survival, and we're going to need that difference in what we can do. So I think both have been really, really positive signings.
Yeah, and
Yeah, you sort of already saw like a chop and change, didn't you? Sort of, you look towards the end of the game, Brown comes on or Benny comes on, and Edwards wasn't afraid to go, all right, Anderson, and he hooked him off to change the formation and actually try something different. And that sort of alludes to your point. At the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of times this season where we're starting with a 3-4-1-2, but by 50, 60 minutes, we could be 1-2 goals down, or it could even be 0-0, and whatever we are trying just is not coming off. But Edwards has already shown one game in. He's like, well, this is why I've brought in a Jacob Brown and an Orbene for that sort of position change. And he's not afraid to hook players that aren't playing well or hook players from positions that normally we're comfortable playing another formation. It's like, no, we're going to go and match you, or we're going to go and try something different to actually go and win this game.
yeah, and that change to back four was interesting. I think in hindsight, it was the right move, but probably the wrong personnel. I think keeping Giles and Doughty as the fullbacks was a mistake. I probably would have picked Giles and shifted Bell to left back rather than kept Giles at left back. I think defensively we were quite frail. Obviously, noting that we had to go and get a goal, but I still think we had to keep some element of defensive solidity there. So I think Anderson and Lockyer as a centre half pairing probably would have been the better choice. Well, that's obviously in hindsight. But going forward, with it fantastic. Brown came on within the first few minutes. He won the penalty, right? I mean, I think we were on the right of the goal when we won a corner, and there was something going on with the home fans. We turned on and we didn't even see Brown come on, and then a minute later we get the penalty. So like, it just shows the impact that he had. So I think the flexibility to be able to do that, I think was it. We had Brown, Woodrow, Ogbene behind Morris, and then Berry and was it Pelly sitting at times, or Pelly and the Canvas sitting. So I mean that's a strong front four in terms of Morris, Woodrow, Brown, and Ogbene. So I think to be flexible and do that is really important. And I mean, yeah, in a different world, Pelly gets rid of it, and it's 2-1 for longer. And who knows, right? We were definitely in the ascendancy. And I think if it was 2-1 for a few more minutes, we may have grabbed an equaliser, which would have sent the amazing away and then into raptures. That I think that for me was another positive of Saturday. Like, no matter what happened, the away end was singing throughout, and I think it was fantastic. And the away end needs to keep doing that for the next 18 away games this season, and obviously 19 homes, but in particular away from home, we're going to need to be as loud as that all season.
I second that. It's quite easy where we've been used to winning. I think we had a discussion potentially on either last pod or might have been when we were in Germany, and we were sort of saying the last few years, the majority of games we've won, obviously, where we've gone from non-league to Prem in 10 years, by laws of average, you have to have won most of those games, right? So we're used to that winning mentality now, and buckle up, lads, because this season, I said it after the game, I was like, if you were watching Graham Jones's Luton Town week in, week out, by God, it was a depressing 9 months. Like, very, very depressing. However, you had to stick by it. You wanted to stick by it. We still turned up to Birmingham knowing we're getting twatted. We turned up to Brentford knowing we were going to get battered. It's just all these little things. Like, get it accustomed into your heads. We're going to go to Liverpool and be the underdogs. We're going to go to City and probably get beat 7-0. But then we'll end up going to Wolves, or we'll end up going to
Everton,
Arsenal and end up with a point and getting a 3 points here and whatever else. But buckle up, because as always, it's going to be a Luton Town special roller coaster. It's probably going to be worse than that stealth thing at Fort Park, to be honest with you. It's going to be a hell of a ride. Even worse than Saw, actually, saying that. Good analogy. But stick by the team. Those of you that can get tickets, take a ticket and bloody go. Like, support the team the whole way, because that is going to be... We always say about at home, how that's our thing. Oh, the fans turn up in their numbers, and that's what's going to drive us forward. The same rules apply away, because we outsang Brighton for 90 minutes.
I think you're
Wasn't hard.
Kieran, I think you're lucky that it's not a theme park, because you might not meet the height criteria.
To be honest, not only would I not meet the height criteria for half the rides, I'd also vomit before I even step on. There is one thing in life I'm scared of, and it is roller coasters, the physical kind, not the Luton Town kind. So yeah, not the one.
If we can bring that intensity to every single away game, the way the fans were from minute one, conceding goals, being on the back foot for large parts of the game, and if we can remain as loud and intense as we were, we will stay up. I am sure of it. If us fans can remain, as good as we were at Brighton, I've got no doubts that we've got mental character. I'm sure the players will thrive off it as well, and we've seen that last season when atmosphere was good. Our players rose to the occasion. Back them every time to do that again. And
It sounds like Leeds now. Fans win your games.
They will. I'm sure of it.
90th
Anyway,
minute, really Mully on the score sheet.
Anyway, we'll head into a short break, and after that, we will discuss the latest on the transfer front. We are back from our short break, and as mentioned before, we're going to talk about the transfer market. We've got a few little bits to go on about, but I think it's the best place to start. It's Ross Barkley. Ain't nobody like Ross Barkley. He'll core signed. It is one that is a signing we've come to expect in the way that we didn't know anything about it. That's probably a really weird way to say it, but we've grown accustomed to, over the years, seeing these signings come out the blue. I think it was Woodrow. Was it Woodrow last year that there was no...
it was Doughty straight away, wasn't it?
Doughty.
The first one, yeah.
Doughty, and look at the player he turned out to be. But those are the best kind of signings, that there's no real links whatsoever. Maybe a few people on Twitter suggesting that it would be a good signing, but there were no credible links that I saw linking us to Ross Barkley, which is great to see. It is great to see that we can still, being a Premier League club, we can operate under the radar, and what a signing it is as well. A player that Rob Edwards didn't want to say something to prove, but I think he's a player that will want to prove himself again. Had difficulties after and he still does have a really high ceiling. So I think Luton's a very good place for him to continue his development. Only 29 years of age as well, which is incredible to think, and place him in that midfield in games where we need that bit of quality from central areas. And that thought in itself really excites me. Stephen, I'll come to you first about Ross Barkley. First of all, wow, where did it come from? And second of all, what do you see his kind of role being? Do you think he's going to be, in time, regular starter? Do you think he's going to be somebody that's more rotation, or do we just have to wait and see how it plays out?
I think it will be. I think he'll end up being, if it goes well, obviously. I think he'll end up being a regular starter. I think his experience, obviously, of the league is going to be good for us, and I can see Rob Edwards probably being able to get some good stuff out of him, get the best out of him, hopefully. And I think it gives a different edge to our midfield, because at the moment, the starting three was, what was it? As Pelly, Nakamba, and who else was it? Chong. That's it, Chong. Having someone different to those three, because I think they're all quite short. They're not as powerful. And I think I saw Nakamba getting overpowered quite a lot. And not saying that Barkley's going to be the defensive midfielder, but I think having someone that can just give a different element in the midfield is going to be good. And going forward, it's going to be really valuable as well for us. Yeah, I think. I mean, when it happened, I was just like, how do we? I can't believe this is where we are now. Yeah, it's mental that we've got someone like Ross Barkley, and I think everyone else's reaction as well. I saw on social media and friends and all that. They're all saying what the hell? Like, where did this come from? As we've said, so it's a Luton special, really, and I think it's going to be a really, really good one as well. A really good signing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've likened it to the Lansbury signing. What was it, 2 years ago, when it sort of again out of the blue. They had no idea it was coming, and relatively in terms of the experience at the level and what I guess in hindsight, okay, Lansbury wasn't a 46 game a season man, but it was definitely a successful transfer in terms of getting him in. What he did for us both on and off the pitch was so important. And I think, like Lansbury's goal at Hull, he can just do the special. And I think sometimes the Premier League squad needs a player that might not add for 38 games, which is now, I was going to say 46, but 38 games of sort of consistency and solid performance. But what he can add is just that moment of magic, which can win games at this level. You look at the players that Brighton have, that they have loads of those players that have that moment of magic that can go or get an assist. So I think that's something that Barkley can bring to us. And if we can get him back to even half of what he was at Everton, I think his Chelsea transfer again didn't really work out in hindsight, and he's gone on a loan to Villa, and he was at Nice last year, which was decent. I mean, he got 4 goals, 2 assists, and 9 starts. Okay, he played more times than that off the bench, but 9 starts. So to get 4 goals and 2 assists is decent for a number 8, which is where he'll play in our system. And I think he's what we need. If I look back or think back to what made him good at Everton, it was the ability to drive up the pitch from deep, so be able to win the ball and bring it up the pitch for our wide men and forwards, and also it's the runs off the ball into the box. I think that there was a few goals they showed in the highlights where he sort of ran in behind the centre half off the striker and managed to get into the box and score. So I think that's two attributes that we're going to need in midfield. I think Chong is fantastic on the ball in terms of his ability, but I mean, I think if there's a question mark right now, it's going to be his ability off the ball. So we're going to need someone like a Barkley who off the ball is going to be on it and has the experience at this level to be able to both track a man defensively and run beyond man off the ball when we as a team have the ball. So he had so much experience to us as a team. Agree with Stephen. I'm not sure if he's going to play every game, but I think even if he can put 15, 20 games together for us, I think he's going to add a lot to us.
And Kieran Robertson, our Luton, finally about to sign a goalkeeper that's 35 plus. There's links at the moment that Luton are in advanced talks with Norwich City goalkeeper Tim Krul, a player that has a lot of Premier League experience, I think over 200 games at top flight level in the English game. Is he the kind of player you'd like to see at Kenilworth Road? And I think when we've mentioned players like Tom Heaton and John Ruddy as well, people that are seemingly in that kind of bracket, they add experience both on and off the pitch. Is that what you see in Tim Krul, somebody that's going to help in equal amounts on and off the pitch?
Yeah, and he fits into sort of, again, like you said, that John Ruddy, Asmir Begovic, that sort of mould, older keeper. Been around the block a couple of times, a lot of Premier League appearances, over 200. Goes without saying the experience that man will carry. Plays for the Dutch national team as well. So for me, it's only a positive. Again, like we've brought in Kaminsky, who is under 30, is probably going to be the number 1 based on his performances so far. But every good number 1 needs a good number 2. And I think Tim Krul, again, fits that sort of mould. Obviously, recently been playing in the Championship, so unlike Begovic, he's actually been actively playing, which is a key thing. Like, he's probably looking to sort of reduce that play time. He won't necessarily be too fussed about being number 2. So, yeah, for me, get him in. Again, brings that experience, GK Union, all that good stuff we've already mentioned before.
You on the same wavelength there, Jamie? Tim Krul. There's been this very evident notion that we've been trying to recruit an older goalkeeper, and us looking into it, it does look that that kind of experience factor plays a big part in what we're trying to do with the goalkeeping union. Do you think Krul is the kind of goalkeeper that will come to Luton for that cover and competition kind of role? Do you think there's scope for him to, displace Kaminsky as number one if he is to arrive?
Yeah, the TK 1-2 is going to be interesting. But no, I think same as Kieran, really. I mean, that the hope is you bring him in to not play that many games, right? Because the hope is that Kaminsky is good enough to A, play 38 games, and B, not get injured. So the hope is you bring in a number two to play very little. So I think it's more important to see what they're going to offer you off the pitch and in training. And I think he certainly offers loads from that perspective. As Kieran said, he's played for the Dutch national team, so he's played with some very, very good players. And he's been in some very, very good training environments. So he'll bring loads of experience to us. Don't know how many appearances that he's made at Premier League level, but it's going to be in the hundreds. So he's got a lot of experience. A bit like Jody, same again. And if you look at sort of City, Scott Carson, it's that same sort of mould. So I mean, I think we were linked with John Ruddy. Had a $750,000 mil fee agreed. I'm not sure what the sort of fee is for Tim Krul, but I would imagine it's not going to be that amount. So it's probably a cheaper option as well for us. Comes to us from number 2 at Norwich. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to be far from our best signing this summer because it's a number 2 goalkeeper, but it is exactly what we need in this moment.
Going on to a second rumour of this week. I say this week, we're recording on Monday. So if your week starts on Sunday, then yeah, of this week. But of course, it is Zach Viner, Bristol City defender, 26 years old. He's been subject to a lot of interest this summer. But a lot of the reports that surfaced at the early stages, summer didn't really name any teams. But now, according to Bristol Live, there are 3 clubs chasing his signature. Luton are the only Premier League club, but there's also recently relegated Southampton and Rangers, all considering the, I'd like to say, athletic centre-back. From what I've seen of him, he's somebody that fits that mobility box that we're looking to recruit. Somebody that can play on the right side of a back three, and with Osho and Burke prone to injuries, and it's really disappointing that they do keep picking up these issues because I think both of them are more than capable of stepping up to the Premier League. But Zach Viner could be the kind of player that comes in that gives us a little bit more consistency in terms of minutes. I'll come to you, Kieran. Zach Viner, a player we've come across a few times watching Luton versus Bristol City, a player that seemingly the Bristol City fans are very fond of. What do you think he will bring if he was to arrive? And second of all, do you think it would be a good addition, considering you'd probably think that one more defensive addition will wrap up our defensive reinforcements?
With Viner, when the rumour came out, I wasn't going to pretend that I sort of knew a lot about him. I was quite surprised with the rumour at first. However, the fact that that's the rumour that's coming out over, say, another Premier League centre-half probably suggests what's actually available to us this close to the end of the window. We've still got 2.5 weeks. But the fact that we're going after someone that evidently is very heavily touted by Bristol City fans, I've seen nothing but positivity. I've seen a lot of them tell us to F off and leave them alone, which is usually a good sign with a transfer because that suggests the quality that he possesses. He's 26, playing high-end championship, and Bristol have always been that team where I've looked at their squad and gone, yeah, they'll push this year. But the fact that, again, highly sought after, not just by us, but Saints, that's a good sign. They're a team that are trying to bounce straight back up. So if a team like Saints are after a player, 9 times out of 10 is because they think he's good enough to propel them to that next step up. I won't speak for Rangers because Scottish football, you can't really compare. So for me, it's a good sign.
Taking themselves out of the running for him.
Rangers?
Yeah. Mick Beale said that there's no truth in the claim that they're looking at him. So
well, there we go then. Either way, I think getting him in, when we have a couple of players that are injury prone, Reece Burt being the biggest example, always kind of has been. It gets to a certain point where Rob Edwards has to sort of ask the harsher questions of, can he trust these players when they're always injured? And if a player is always injured, you lean towards no, sadly, eliminating any sort of sentimental value we might have for them. So if you're going to get someone who's younger, who's playing top-end championship football, who's highly sought after, it only screams positive so far. And if we're looking in that direction, again, our recruitment are smart. We're not exactly stupid when it comes to that sort of thing. For me, I can only remain positive about it so far.
Yeah, I think that's certainly fair enough. One more question before we wrap up tonight's pod. It's a question that's been fired over to us on Twitter by Jason. He has posed a question: who do we use our final loan on, and what position do we target? It's a difficult question because we still don't know if we'll use that for that final slot, let alone what positions we are prioritising at this stage. Jamie Castle, I'll come to you first. I guess the first part of that question is, where do you think our final loan spot will be used? What position? And then the second part, is there any player out there at the moment that you think would fit that bill?
I mean, I think in terms of a position answer, I think it's a no-brainer at centre half. I think you've got to use your two loan signings on players that are going to play 25 plus games this season, subject to injuries, etc. And I think if you look at our squad right now, I think in terms of the areas that we need to strengthen is goalkeeper, but unless they're going to sort of displace Kaminsky, they're not going to start. So there's no point using your loan slot on a keeper. For me, a centre half, but I think a centre half can start, which obviously my answer. And probably for me, a defensive mid, sort of as a backup / rotation option to Nakamba. And again, unless they're going to displace Nakamba for that starting shirt, then you probably shouldn't use a loan slot on a player like that. So for me, it's centre half. So it's got to be a right of a free centre half. In terms of names, I mean, thinking back to links, obviously Tanganga is an option. He's still at Spurs, doesn't seem to be getting games. Whether or not we can do I guess seemingly right now the loan to option to buy sort of thing is very, very common right now. So maybe that's an option. Beyond that, I'm not really sure. And I mean, I think it's got to be someone of a caliber that we can't afford on a permanent. Tanganga obviously fits that mold. He's probably going to cost upwards of 10 million, where we probably don't want to spend a fee like that. I'm sure there's loads of centre halves both in the UK and on the continent. Don't forget, I mean, we're not just limited to English based players, right? There's going to be a list of centre halves out in Europe that want either game time or a chance at the Premier League. So if we can negotiate smartly a loan deal that gives us some sort of option to buy on those, that would be amazing. I know obviously there was moments of Ghent, so who knows what's coming out with that. But yeah, I think for me, in terms of a loan slot, absolute no-brainer. It's got to be a centre half. I think that categorically will be a transfer that decides how we come this season. I think if Birkenhoff are out for the long haul and Anson's got to play there for 38 games, with no real backup to him as well, I think we might struggle. So I think we need to get that centre half transfer right. It's going to be so important. So if we can use our loan slot to get a player that's going to come in and be top 3, top 5 players in our squad, then we just have to do it.
And Stephen, same question to you, starting with what position you feel you'd want to strengthen with that last remaining loan spot, and are there any players that might sort of fit the bill considering what your thoughts are?
I mean, well, I agree with Jamie. It's definitely centre half. Like, obviously, we've spoken about the injuries, spoken about, like, you know, can we trust them, like with the Osho and Berg, like with their injuries. I don't think there's a lot more that I can add to it. Like, I think I was thinking after watching the the first Brighton goal on Saturday, it was Bell that missed the man, and I was thinking, like, I know that he's done really, really well as a centre half, but sometimes I think he just lacks that sort of natural defensive mind, or natural like centre half like mind to really like stop those sorts of goals from happening. It's the only person that I could think of, the only name that actually came to me like for that sort of position was Axel Tuanzebe, but he's being released by Man United, so I haven't got someone for it. But I would say someone that is of that age, or even a bit younger, because he's 25, younger, from a bit like Kabore, coming from a top end Premier League club, and someone that can add a lot of quality, but a lot of like, I don't know what the word would be, just a lot of fight, I guess, like, because they're young, they've got something to prove. I think that's what I would look for, but at the same time, I'm sure most clubs are looking for someone like that. So I'm not a scout. I don't know what will be available really, but you never know. We might get to the last few days of the window, or the last day of the window, and there might be something that just comes up, as there usually is. So there might be someone that we can bring in that does fit that sort of bill, that isn't going to get the game time that they think they should have. So not much else to add on that.
I wonder how much.
And it would be typical.
Sorry, Bill. I wonder how much Cresswell at Leeds costs. I mean, you sort of think about how he played at Millwall last season. He's starting at Leeds now. I wonder how much Leeds would let him go for. I mean, even a loan, right? I mean, there's examples of Leeds loaning players to the Premier League. I mean, Harrison signed for Everton today on a loan, so that could be an interesting one. And if we could get him right over free, I think that would be a fantastic sign.
Jamie, Kieran's going to be fuming with you because he's got a couple names in mind. He's had to wait till last. So if you've just nicked one of his, I'm sure I'll be fuming. Kieran, come to you.
Yeah. So before this question started, I had one name, and the bugger above me did steal the name that was in my head. However, thank you, Stephen, for inspiring me with your answer, because I now have 3 names I would like to throw at you instead of 1. To answer the left-sided centre-half quota that Stephen gave us, a name still sticks out to me that I wish we'd loaned him last year. And I know a lot of Cov fans were a bit and ahhing about him, but I would still take him. Jonathan Panzo, obviously permanently at Nottingham Forest. Left-sided centre-half, still quite young, but imposing. 6'2", left-footed, comes out, drives from the defence, fits the Luton bill, to be honest. And then again, like, you've got Bell for depth, whether it be out on the left. If you want to, like Jamie said, go for the 4 and chuck him out there, or even at left-sided centre-half. I thought of 2 other right-sided centre-halves while Jamie was talking as well, that lacking game time at their parent clubs, but have played Premier League football, both local to Luton as well, so they wouldn't have to relocate or move very far. I'm going to present you 2 names. I'm going to go Nathan Ferguson from Crystal Palace, and I'm going to go Ben Johnson from West Ham. 2 names that have both played Premier League football, initially both sort of like right-back, centre-back hybrid type players, but in a free, they'd happily play centre-half. Ben Johnson's out of the team at West Ham. There was a stint where he was in the team. He's out of it now. Nathan Ferguson, bought from West Brom, never really got in Palace's side, quite honestly. Both names that I think if you were to knock on the doors and say, we'll give you X amount and promise them first-team football, neither of them are turning it down. And like I said, we won't have to relocate very far, even if it's a year loan or loan with option to buy on either of them. Both under 25 as well, and Panzo also fits that under 25 bill. But like I said, still have that experience of playing in the Premier League.
Yeah, I can see that. I want a quick show of, well, nod of heads or cross crossing of heads. With my one, Taylor Harwood-Bellis. And I don't know if he's attainable still. I still don't know if he's somebody. I think he fits what Jamie was trying to say, where he'd probably be outright too expensive. But is he somebody that could come in on loan with a potential to? I don't know. I don't think he'd be attainable to sign permanently, because I think the figure would be too much. But I think there's a lot of clubs that have looked at him but have since moved on in their search. And I think that's where Luton can come in with. There's a sort of a profile of player that if clubs that have probably got a better pulling power than we do, if they move on from their search, that's where a club like Luton can come in. And I think he is that kind of player that Man City might not panic, but want to get him out to a Premier League club. And that's where someone like us could be standing, waiting, if we are patient.
I think the answer to that, unfortunately, is a technical no, because we can't, because he's Man City and we got Kabore.
I've wasted my voice.
So I think in terms of a player, spot on, would love him. But I think it's got to be a permanent if we were to get him, which I think, as you say, is going to be out of our price bracket, unfortunately.
Can we give Kabore back?
No.
No chance. Yeah,
No.
I take that back very quickly now, because I do love Kabore already, and he's my pick for signing of the season in our prediction. So yeah, please. That was stupid. That was very stupid. On that note, a big thank you to you three for joining today. A big thank you to everybody that has watched and listened, either on YouTube or wherever you stream our podcast version of the podcast from. Of course, we have been trying to make big strides on different social platforms at the moment, namely TikTok has been brilliant. A lot of love and support on there. A lot of Watford fans also commenting on a recent post that we might have put up. But yeah, for all the love that's been shown on TikTok, YouTube, continued support on Instagram and Twitter, big thank you to everyone. And if you don't follow us on any of those platforms at the moment, of course, we are Oak Road Hatter Bar on Instagram, where we are Oak Road Hatter Pod. But until next week, where we take a closer look at Chelsea as we preview our second Premier League fixture of the season, it is goodbye for now.